Hello and welcome to the Kitchen Conversations podcast. My name is Patrycja Rozwora and I'm the host of this platform where we speak about contemporary art from so-called Eastern Europe. In each episode, you're going to be introduced to one artist or researcher whose visual or activist practice sheds light onto the complex former socialist region with all its histories, cultures, languages, foods, but also traumas and their inevitable contemporary consequences. This podcast is a fully independent platform existing since May 2020, meaning it is not a funded project and it is self-run by me, myself, and I. If you enjoy the monthly conversations, please consider supporting the podcast by making a single donation on buymeacoffee.com/kitchenconversations or becoming my monthly Patreon via the Patreon website. All the needed links can be found in the show notes of this episode. Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back after our short break. I hope you've had a refreshing summer and are ready for some brand new conversations. Today's guest is someone I've long hoped to feature on this podcast, and I'm very happy to finally share his voice and insights with you. Today's episode was recorded in Polish, so if you do not speak that language, go check out the overdubbed version that I have uploaded as well. In this episode, I speak with Polish artist Daniel Rycharski, whose work spans multiple media with installations at the heart of his practice. Daniel explores themes of provincial life, religiosity, Christianity, and LGBTQ+ identity, challenging binaries and creating new spaces of dialogue between them. As he told me in this conversation, according to the narratives we often hear from politicians and the media, his very existence as a gay, religious man living in the Polish countryside should be impossible. Yet, through his art, Daniel not only asserts this existence, but also builds bridges between communities often seen in conflict with each other. Welcome, Daniel.
Dzień dobry, dziękuję.
Hello, thank you for the invitation.
We were part of the same Art at Tracks East episode. I was moderating this episode and you were one of the guests. However, we never met in person. It was quite funny because I was talking about your work without knowing you. So while preparing for that episode, I learned about your work and your projects and put you on my list of future guests.
In general, now is a good time to talk. It's a moment of summing up the last few years of my artistic activities before starting a new chapter in art. It's a good time to talk.
Okay, interesting. And you've been active more than 10 years now, right? I have calculated something like that.
Well, MSN says my artistic activities started in 2009. That's what they calculated. So from the moment I started painting murals, I called it rural street art. When I started painting rural street art at farms in the countryside in my village, but not only in my family village, but also in the surrounding villages, Smorzew, Gorzew, Krączkowo, etc. So we can say it has been 15 years.
I chyba odtąd się liczy właśnie, więc można powiedzieć, że mija 15 lat, tak.
And I think your work, as I've observed, is constantly changing and evolving, which is really interesting. But I'm also curious about how it all started. How you decided to become an artist even before going to college, before you moved to Kraków, because that's where you studied, right?
Yes, to be honest, I can't remember anymore. I remember, however, I grew up in the countryside and my mother had artistic skills and wanted to go to an art high school, to Zakopane or elsewhere. But my grandmother from Kurówek didn't let her because she was scared for her daughter and eventually sent her to a normal school in Sierpc. I was therefore encouraged to draw and paint and later knew very quickly in primary school already that I wanted to go to an art high school and later study at an art academy. So I don't remember that exact moment because it seems I always wanted to make visual art.
Okay, so you were lucky to have known that from the beginning, and it seems you still enjoy making art.
Yes, my art keeps changing. From traditional classic art like drawing, painting, graphics, it evolved into engaged art, social art, and now post-conceptual art. It has evolved massively over these years.
A teraz już sztuki postkonceptualnej, więc to na pewno się bardzo zmieniło przez lata.
In Poland, you are a recognizable artist. I think that a lot of people know you and appreciate your work. I also love your work, and I think that it's very needed by the Polish society and beyond. We do have a problem with polarization and with the fact that everyone stands on one or the other side of the political spectrum. And your work allows for dialogue.
No, moja praca pokazuje, że podziały, które...
Well, yes, my work shows that these divisions shown to us by politicians or journalists are in fact quite different.
To przebiegają trochę inaczej. I w ogóle moja obecność.
And my very presence, the fact that I exist here, shouldn't really be possible if going with those divisions. Theoretically, such a person like me shouldn't exist.
To teoretycznie takiej osoby jak ja w ogóle taka osoba nie powinna istnieć, prawda?
So, as you said, you were born in Kurówek. It's a village located in the center of Poland, in the Mazovia region.
To jest dokładnie w centrum.
It's exactly in the middle of Poland, the northwest of Mazovia, 120 kilometers northwest of Warsaw, close to Warsaw.
Later, you studied in Kraków and returned to your small village to create art. This is where your artistic persona, so to speak, was born. I would like you to tell us about the first successful project you created in your hometown, together with the residents of Kurówek.
Bo to było tak, że...
Just like every student, at the end of my studies, I was wondering what to do next. Till recently, Kraków was considered the cultural capital of Poland. There are many museums, institutions, galleries there. The artistic scene of Poland was centered around Kraków. Now less so, but still. I had no family ties to the city. It's a very bourgeois city, to the point of pain. I had nothing to say there. There were so many artists, many points of view, it felt like carrying wood to the forest. So I kept returning to my hometown in the countryside, because I'm a family person, and that's the main reason. In spite of being an LGBT person, I like to stay close to my family, the close and the extended family. I do not break off the contact. My family is the co-creators of my projects. They are involved in my art. What's interesting, after all those years of cooperation, they actually got a good taste in art and can recognize the bullshit in art. I noticed that when I go to exhibitions with them, they know how to recognize what is cool, interesting, and what is not necessarily interesting. Once there was a funny situation when Mariusz Szczygieł, one of the most important Polish journalists, came here to Kurówek and asked my father, "Should art be beautiful?" And my father replied, "Beautiful is a calf when a cow licks its clean. Art is there to make us think." And then I thought, wow, it's been a long way. If he understands that after all these years.
Yeah, you can be proud of yourself.
So to come back to my first project, I came back to the countryside and started researching based on my knowledge that 90% of Poland consists of villages. In Poland, we've got 55,000 villages, and this is an area abandoned by artists. Artists gather around big cities, big centers. In Poland or Germany, many people have left for Berlin or London. And I thought, wow, nobody cares for this area. I started to dig deeper into the topic through literature and various studies. 2009 was big for public art. Street art became hip in Poland. Mariusz Waras, M-City, a foundation called VNET, post-vandalist interventions. But it all happened in the city. And I thought, wow, we also have public spaces in the countryside. Why don't I start making street art in the countryside? Is that even possible? And yes, I came up with the idea of painting animal silhouettes, hybrid ones, and combination of different species in the form of shadows that appear on sheds, barns, bus stops, houses, fences, and so on. It wasn't too controversial, although it was a big intervention to have such an animal painted on someone's property. A big intervention in the visual tissue of this village. But people allowed me to do it and even encouraged and invited to their houses. So it turned out well. People liked it. I think people understood that I was a local as well, not a random artist who came from somewhere with who knows what kind of intentions, looking at the local rural population from above. But since it's an artist with family ties to the village, we can let him do this. And once the street art project turned into a success, the media picked up on it. Suddenly, the residents of the village saw themselves in the eyes of others. They now had a reason to be proud of their village, to share it with their families, from Silesia, for example. Because suddenly TVN or the Polish radio was reporting on Kurówek. And so this one of 55,000 villages was no longer anonymous. It was a place associated with culture.
So it seems the people of the village were craving the culture. You would assume, thinking in stereotypical terms, that in the countryside you work hard for living. It's a hard life, so there's no place for culture, because culture is secondary when it comes to survival.
No, it's not second rate. It's first rate. Everything revolves around agriculture. I mean, back then it was revolving around agriculture. And agriculture is also culture. My entire art practice aims to remind people that agriculture is not part of economics or management, but it is culture. So what do we mean by culture? Culture is everything people create, including agriculture. Agriculture lasted in Poland for 1,000 years. It created holidays, rituals, folk culture, peasant culture, folk art. The changes began after 1989 with the Polish transformation. Suddenly, something else became important. But we have to pay a price for it. Because the victim of this transformation from communism to democracy was the Polish countryside. It paid a price for it. The creation of civil society became more important than folk art, for example. The village was abandoned by the elites, abandoned by the city. And I have the impression that this contributed to the growing frustration of the countryside. Another important date was 2004, the year when Poland joined the EU. Now, to make it clear, the 2004 entry into the EU was for the Polish countryside a salvation. I even think that 2004 was a so-called incorporation of the Polish village into Poland. For the first time in its 1,000-year history, the Polish village got financed on this scale. But it had to pay a price for it. The price was the culture around agriculture that lasted for thousands of years. The agriculture around small family farms. And in the 90s, this culture didn't disappear, but became less important. There was other important things to take care of after the transformation, till the moment Poland joined the EU. So suddenly I appear in the village after the Second Revolution and remind about culture. And people like it, because people are craving the community. In the past, the social ties at the countryside were very strong, because of poverty. No one had it all, so everyone had to cooperate with everyone to survive somehow.
And in terms of building or returning to the feeling of community, can you speak about another of your early projects, an absolutely great project, Kapliczka? Yes, exactly. Could you tell more about it?
After the mural project, I wanted to do something And I was even encouraged to do another permanent project that will remain in Kurówek, something that no other village has. So once I received a piece of land from the village mayor, I came up with the idea of making a gallery. But a gallery that is in the shape of a typical Mazovian shrine. So a 2-story pedestal with a glass vitrine on top and a roof made of solar panels. That way the shrine could generate electricity in order to show multimedia artworks. The vitrine also had light inside. And it was great. Actually, one of my favorite projects, in fact, not that known to the public. The shrine was standing at the exit from the village towards the pastures, back at the day when farmers still had cows. The pedestal had a movement detector, so once the residents walked by, it was greeting them with a good morning. It was a very optimistic, positive project, but still future-oriented, showing modern art. And next to the shrine stood my other work, Winter Garden. It was an extension to the exhibition at Kapliczka Gallery. I noticed that near farmers' houses, barns in Kurówek, but also other villages nearby, people are getting rid of agricultural equipment.
Which is also connected to this transformation, right?
Well, it's connected to the end of the peasant culture, the end of agriculture on a human scale. And of the time when around 50% of Polish farms had about 10 hectares, where one small plow was big enough to work the entire field. So agriculture on a human scale and on an animal scale. It was enough to have 5 cows, 10 pigs, and they had a good life at the farm. At some point they passed away, but they had names and so on. That was the moment in time, and I noticed it was coming to an end. So I saw the scattered, abandoned plows and started collecting them. Plows, different agricultural machine scraps. I welded them into spatial forms that were supposed to resemble a winter garden. And it was January 2013. I set them in a panorama next to the shrine, and they did look like plants, flowers set up on a winter field.
Rośliny, kwiaty ustawione na zimowym polu.
So an actual gallery where you can see sculptures, art pieces. A lot of your project is made at the countryside. You have a lot of space there and are not limited by walls. But later you often show them in typical gallery settings, white cubes, to artistic and class elites.
Yes, so if I create projects, especially big ones, because I make big objects, big sculptures, but I also make small ones, depending on the topic, I try to first show my works to the residents of the village, if the project allows for it, because sometimes it's impossible. And only later they are brought to cities where the exhibitions and presentations take place. I also cooperate with a private gallery that takes care of my pieces. Mostly it's the small objects that are stored in the warehouse. The big pieces I do keep in my village. So they stand around and you can watch them outdoors. My neighbors often come by and ask what those works are.
Cool. You get a direct feedback from people.
Well, yes, I think in the past I tried harder for my projects to be totally understandable for the people of the village. Now it's not that important for me, although there are some projects where that's the aim. For example, my recent project, Passion. Sculptures made out of agricultural machines that created 15 stations of the cross. Interesting project, the biggest I was working on so far. There were dozens of big agricultural machines used. For each station, I used at least 3 agricultural machines. First, I had to get these machines from somewhere, buy them. There weren't entire machines at the junkyard, so I had to... I've traveled the whole region, went to Sierpc, even close to Łódź.
Zjechałem cały region.
In the end, I found a farmer from Ciechanów. Krzysiek was his name. We were always in touch. I told him what I needed, paid him, and he drove to his farmer friends and organized for me everything. A seeder, plow, rake, a mower. I wrote to him what I needed, and he drove around and brought the stuff to me.
Jeździł i później mi przywoził.
And this project was super interesting for farmers. I remember some of them passed by. I was making it at my father's courtyard in Gorzewo. They were surprised that I'm making stations of the cross from agriculture machines on such a large scale.
Tak wielkiej skali z maszyn rolniczych.
They liked it. I got positive reactions. In general, I have a feeling that people from the countryside reacted much better to this particular artwork than people from the city. Because the work was later shown at the Festival of Many Cultures in Łódź, and the work was better received in the countryside than in the city. Before creating the work, I did some research around the Passion of Christ presentations in Poland, and it turned out that these performances are problematic because they preserve myths related to, they preserve xenophobia. The reluctance towards Jews through the figure of Judas and all those who aren't like us. And I thought that we shouldn't give up on the Passion, but we should think about what to do with those ruler performances to cut this anti-Semitic element from it. And I came up with the idea of creating the 15th station. Because how does the Station of the Cross end? Christ dies on the cross, the end. Pessimistic, negative. So I added the 15th station where the resurrected Christ finds the body of Judas and carries it on his back. In this way, in a very simple gesture, the anti-Semitic element is gone. Because Jesus leans over Judas, over his body. Judas stops being a tyrant of all times. And behind Judas, all the Jews, LGBT people, and so on. And the Passion was made from agricultural machines in order to be close to the ruler people, to show the story in a different light, in a sacred, religious light, but without the anti-Semitic, xenophobic element. I think in general it's a huge problem in Polish folk culture. And although I am devoted to showing the village from the positive side, having a much greater knowledge than an average person, anthropological, ethnographic knowledge, I know that there are elements, especially in the peasant culture, that require reworking. And it is possible to work through it with people from the countryside, to work on anti-Semitism in the Polish culture.
Big topic. Very interesting that you're working through it in your work. Till now, we spoke about your projects that you have created with the inhabitants of the village, your communal projects. But at some point, you had the need to also show yourself in your art. You had an artistic coming out as an LGBT person with your project Bed. It was the first project that you showed in the countryside where you wanted to speak about yourself, about your identity. I'm curious how you see that project from the perspective of time. What were the reactions to it?
Yes, I remember it very well because it was another revolution in my art. Prior to that, I was doing projects about the countryside, about the needs, worries, fears of the village. At some point, after I have created the monument of the peasant, the one which was traveling all over Poland, I felt that my story also deserves to be told. There are these LGBT minorities that I belong to, and their untold stories in Poland should be told somehow. And my first work was the work Bed, where I took an old peasant bed from one of the houses in Kurówek and pierced it with a large stone cemetery cross, an ordinary heavy cross. The cross penetrates the bed, showing religion in an inappropriate place. Religion that penetrates, destroys what is very private, what is personal. Religion in a place where it should not be. Because how can there be a cemetery cross in someone's bed?
nagrobny krzyż, prawda,
It's not its place.
To jest jakby nie, to nie jest jego miejsce. I to dobrze
And in my opinion, it illustrates the situation of religion in Poland.
w Polsce.
It was a monument of loneliness. I also called it like that. On the other hand, it shows what this cross does with the lives of LGBT people in the countryside. The Polish village has the biggest percentage of men's suicide in the whole country. Many of them are gay or bisexual people. I know for a fact of such cases. We had such people in Kurówek, in surrounding villages. And this is the first time that someone gives them a voice, someone tells their story. But it was also a very personal project done after my traumatic relationship with the church. Very traumatic. And maybe that work was too harsh for the time, in a sense that people of the village took it very badly. This work was created in a dried out swamp because I was not allowed to do it anywhere publicly. Funny enough, as it turned out, the swamp was connected to an interesting legend. Apparently, there was a church there that has collapsed due to the sins of the inhabitants. So it was a funny combination, this bed in a swamp, which was once a church that fell under the influence of sins. Of course, it is an ethnographic story appearing throughout Poland, which is a so-called folk Bible. People in the village, not knowing the Bible, transposed biblical stories into local legends. For example, the story about Sodom and Gomorrah was turned into a legend about a church that fell into the swamp due to people's sins. And this story was told in many, many places in Poland, many villages, and in fact, it speaks about Sodom and Gomorrah. But in my case, it was a fun coincidence.
And going back to the dialogue you're creating. As mentioned at the beginning, it's a difficult dialogue to connect the farmers with LGBT people, and also as a religious, spiritual person to function among the artistic elites. A project, or rather an action that you created, titled Family Care, attempted a bridge between these two minorities, because as you say, the farmers are also a minority in Poland, because these small farms and the way they used to work do not exist anymore. So you let these two groups meet, and I think it's an amazing action. Can you tell us more about it?
Yes, thank you. I like this project as well, and I regret that it has not been repeated because it should have been. This idea came from living in the south of France, in Nice. Back then, I saw Poland from a distance for the first time and realized how terribly polarized we are. How far away the village where I grew up in is from the places I work in Warsaw. That Poland is suffering from a sort of disease. So I wondered, can it be healed using art? In general, I do keep in touch with anthropologists, researchers of the countryside. And I stumbled upon a book by Andrzej Pejanowski titled Family Care, that tells a story from the beginning of 1930s in Poland, when psychiatric facilities were overfilled. There was no space for new patients, and those who were more or less calm were given to farmers to work and live there. That way they were not locked behind bars where they could not leave, but they could spend time in an open area, live with farmers, help on the farm. The farmers became their guardians, sort of doctors. Of course, I do not compare the situation of LGBT people to mentally ill people, because it has nothing to do with it. But what I wanted to do is to find LGBT people who are suffering from mental health issues and various other crises which were caused by systemic homophobia in the country. This is the time when the president of Poland says that LGBT people are not people. Other politicians of the ruling party talk horrible things about LGBT, things that cause a lot of mental breakdowns. So I feel I need to do something about it. And at the same time, those who vote the ruling party are the farmers, the Polish village. But I already knew back then that those farmers are also a minority. Today, the Polish countryside counts 330 to 550,000 farmers. 1 million people receive subsidies, but the EU subsidies are also received by people living in cities who own some land. And so the Polish farmers are also in crisis due to the changes that have occurred after Poland's entrance into the EU. An example, liquidation of small family farms. And now I got these two groups, the LGBT group, oppressed by the state, and those farmers who are in crisis because of the transformation of small family farms into capitalistic mass farming, where animals, nature, and men are suffering. So I thought to myself, could these two groups help each other? And it turns out, yes, they can. However, it was also a bit of a puzzle. Museum of Modern Art produced this project. It was a very brave idea. First of all, I drove around and asked farmers if they would take care of an LGBT person for a week.
And how were the reactions?
Some people banged their heads against the wall, but not because it's terrible, but saying, we are not farmers anymore. We can't provide people with interesting activities. We don't have agriculture here. We don't even have cows here. But eventually my farmer friends from the area helped me find 5 farms in 5 different villages by some miracle. And these LGBT people came and it worked out. They developed very good relationships and there was no problem. It was great. The farmers were very happy and the LGBT people as well. I know that up until this day, some of them keep in touch. Sadly, this project was impossible to continue. But if some foundation or state-led institution would run such project for 10 years in some region of Poland, after those 10 years, homophobia would disappear from this region. When people meet face to face, all prejudice that farmers hear on TV from the state news would disappear. Sadly, they would only see those people as real humans. And the government's insults wouldn't matter anymore. So that turned out great. Later, there were even ideas to make it into a reality TV show. Polish TV stations came to me proposing something like, we already have TV shows about the life of farmers. They proposed a similar format where farmers take care of gays. But eventually it didn't work out because television has a certain budget for each episode and needs to provoke conflicts. In order to have exciting material from each day, they would artificially create these conflicts. So it would not be positive anymore and could end up badly. So I abandoned that idea.
No, of course not. But going back to this dialogue and to the lack of conflict, in your art, you have a very gentle way of conducting this dialogue in a natural, friendly way. I'm curious, how do you look at art that provokes or is seen as more aggressive? Perhaps the terrible things that are happening on a state level towards LGBT community justifies a more sharp and aggressive visual language. How do you see that?
I mean, this type of art is also important. In Poland, we have a long tradition of critical art. And my art is somehow growing out of it. The art of Paweł Althammer, Artur Żmijewski, maybe even Katarzyna Kozyra, although probably less so. But I'm rather distancing myself from it. This type of art was meant to cross borders. And sometimes crossing these borders was at the cost of people, animals. All of us remember the work of Katarzyna Kozyra. I appreciate her work, but her piece Animals Pyramid would not be possible today. Who would allow an artist to kill a dog, horse, a cock to make a sculpture? Nobody would allow this to happen today to join the canon of contemporary art. For me, critical art is a negative point of the reference. I feel much closer to actions of artists who were creating a community,
Tworzyli wspólnotę jak artyści Lucimi.
As artists from Łódź, from the Działania group, or the work of Hasior, also because of his origin. He was never really an avant-garde artist. He was simply a ruler artist. By the way, at the moment I have a duo exhibition with Hasior, already for the second time.
Moja duża wystawa z Hasiorem, to już druga, więc on jest jakoś tam mi bliski.
Your works are quite close.
Tak.
Yes, they are close due to the peasant roots of the Polish society, but also due to the materials used. Hasior tried to evoke emotions in his works, strong emotions. When in the 60s he pierced the bread with a knife and painted it red, as if the bread was bleeding. It was shocking. Today, I'm creating projects where I bake my fetishistic gay underwear in a wedding bread. And this is also provoking people. How do I dare to desecrate bread this way?
Exactly, so you do provoke a little.
I think provocation is a very important part of my art. I would say that my art contains a large dose of perversion, profanation. I'm not afraid of putting things together. For example, in the work Strachy, where I crucify clothes of the LGBT community who experience discrimination or violence. Perversion and provocation were an inspiration for the last show of mine with Hasior, Rozbieranie ze snu, which is in Szczecin until October. To strengthen this aspect of my art, to emphasize that this is a very important part of it. I had a feeling that when I made The Passion, people started giving me a label of some Christian artist who wants to Christianize. But it's not the case at all. And so perversion and provocation are crucial for my practice.
Speaking of faith and religiosity, you're not afraid to use religious symbols in your work. I'm curious, what is your stand on using Christian symbols in art in general?
First of all, I am retrieving the Christian symbols, for example, the cross, for the LGBT community. Because why not? Why can't LGBT people believe as well? I know a lot of people who do. I work with the foundation Wiara i Tańcza, so Christians and LGBT people, mainly Catholics, but not only. The cross is for many in Poland a symbol of immortality, eternal life, rebirth, and for others is a symbol of violence and restrictions. And I'm an artist who shows that it is also our symbol, and that we also can be Catholics, and we are. I know a lot of LGBT Catholics, but these people didn't get much visibility. Because art and culture, and most importantly media, didn't speak about it. Because media likes to show clear divisions. Black and white. A religious gay can't exist. It's slowly changing since Wiara i Tańcza published a lot of books. I made a lot of artworks about it, a film was made, etc. It's slowly taken into account, but still, I find myself confronted with the statement that you can't be a gay and a believer. The same goes for the symbol of the Virgin Mary. It's very interesting to me, maybe even more interesting than the cross, because I also use the cross for visual reasons. Cross is the most beautiful form in nature. The Virgin Mary, on the other hand, whether Poles want it or not, was a very important national symbol, hero who contributed to the creation of contemporary Poland. When between the 19th and the 20th century the Polish statehood was formed, the elites needed a strong symbol that would connect the peasants and the village with the elites. Because back then, the memory of serfdom was still fresh, meaning 5 centuries of servitude in Poland, where the intelligence, the elites, were on the sides of lords, so the enemies. It was a class conflict between the intelligence, the elites, the nobility, and the peasants. So they had to find a symbol that would be common for both groups. And one of these symbols was between the 19th and the 20th century Virgin Mary. And she was, for example, used in folk art. And folk art does not come from the countryside, but it's a complicated political construct invented by the elites for political reasons. And now, whether we want it or not, the Virgin Mary is a national hero. In the countryside, she was the one to speak up for the excluded, poor, sick, betrayed, abandoned. And I thought, why can't she be the patron of the LGBT community, who are being excluded as well? And I did a series of works about it. Among others, I transformed a farm gate into a stained glass window representing Black Madonna of Częstochowa. Or I created a spider web out of rosaries for the Virgin Mary. But not to show that religion is a spider web, although spider web is also a metaphor of religion. But for me, it represented a web that the Virgin Mary throws into hell to get some souls out of it. So I'm trying to regain the national Virgin Mary symbol for the LGBT people.
And what is your stance on the law regarding offenses against religious feelings? Some years ago, there was a big scandal in Poland where someone created a poster with a rainbow Madonna and supposedly offended religious people with it.
First of all, Poland shouldn't have a law regarding offenses against religious feelings, because it's a church law that got transferred to the Polish law, which shouldn't be the case. Poland should not have a law regarding offenses against religious feelings. Second of all, I would still be careful with using those religious symbols that are important for millions of Poles and that can be the source of an even bigger class conflict that we certainly do not need. In order to use the symbols in a subtle way, I got a degree and I'm reading hundreds of ethnographic, religious and anthropological books. And I have the impression that some activists just do things with a big bang, and the only thing they can do is to march in demonstrations, which is also needed, but I know that some things can be done more subtly. I don't remember her last name, but her first name Danuta from Płock, close to Sierps. She created the Rainbow Madonna. Of course, I was a little surprised by the level of public outrage, but I would have done it differently. I would use this rainbow differently. The rainbow doesn't have to be the Virgin Mary's halo. In my Virgin Mary gate, a side gate to a farm that I have transformed into the Black Madonna, the rainbow forms a frame around the Madonna, and it's not her halo. With that work, I was inspired by the 1982 exhibition in the Ethnographic Museum in Kraków that shows how peasants painted Virgin Mary in glass. And usually they transformed her and painted rainbow flowers around her. So I could have done what the woman in Płock did, or I could have given it some more thought and created it in a different way. And it still shows the Madonna as an inclusive figure, patron or ally of the LGBT community, but it's not necessarily violating a taboo and causing controversy. I am an artist who doesn't have to make controversial works. I don't have such needs. This makes me different from the critical artist scene. They had to do such things. They always had to cross the line, and I don't have to cross anything.
It's very, very interesting listening to you. Thank you for answering my questions. We are now coming to the end of our conversation. Lastly, to perhaps break some common stereotypes, tell us, how is the Polish countryside?
One homogeneous Polish village does not exist. The Polish countryside is not monolithic. It's different close to Szczecin, which is located on the recovered lands that were once part of Germany. It's different in Mazovia, and it's completely different in Podkarpacie. Because what is a countryside? Countryside is everything that is outside of the city. What the elites and people from the city did not realize is the great revolution that happened at the countryside after 2004. The place and role of religion have changed. It contributed to the changes in worldview. In that way, it's very similar to the city now. It has also gone unnoticed that we no longer have an agricultural countryside. Farmers are currently only 10% of people living at the countryside, so they are a minority. This is the most important thing that politicians and other people must realize, that we no longer have an agricultural countryside, that we no longer have a picturesque village, like the one from the second half of the 19th century. It's very dangerous, in my opinion, to take folklore as representation of your culture. That's why I'm fighting against this picturesque, folkloric, open-air museum type, Kolberg's type of village. Kolberg was the most famous Polish ethnographer, and according to his books, 99% of their times peasants spent celebrating and dancing. But what about their hard work, their enslavement, etc.? And then this Kolberg's vision was reproduced by Polish literature and cinema. And this is the image I'm fighting against. I'm trying to show the village not only from the side of LGBT people, but also from various other sides, economic, exclusions that take place at the countryside. It is important to say that the Polish village is, unfortunately, poor. The biggest problem at the countryside are social inequalities. Despite joining the EU, which has changed the village positively, and every resident of the village will agree, the social inequalities still exist. And the poverty drives the class conflict, which causes the Polish village to choose such a government today. The social inequalities, this poverty drives those choices. People in the countryside see that the people in the city live on a different level, that they can afford vacations in Venice, for example, and they can't afford anything. It drives the social conflict. Sometimes I hear from city people, look at those farmers, they drive huge combine harvesters playing Coldplay. But let's be honest, all those machinery used for industrial agriculture are purchased on credit. It's not the countryside's ownership.
And for you personally, do you love the Polish village?
I love it here, but at times it's hard to be here. And it's getting harder and harder. The older I get, the more I'm thinking, what am I still doing here? There is no one here, I don't have anyone to speak to. I also have the impression that the more popular I get as an artist, the more people keep me at a distance. No one invites me for a coffee or a party. I feel more and more excluded. And as I'm turning 40 this year, I'm rethinking how long should I still be staying here. Maybe I should move back to the city and start thinking more about myself, and not to think that I have to be here because so many people have left and the village remains with its nationalistic tendencies, for example.
Well, I'm curious to follow your artistic transformation because, as you said, something new is coming up. At the very end of our conversation, I would like to return to the kitchen. My podcast is called Kitchen Conversations, and always at the end, we speak about food. Your favorite food from home. That someone cooks for you, or maybe you cook for someone else.
I love Polish peasant soups. I love sorrel, I love pea soup, I like cucumber soup. In general, I like dishes made from local plants that are not that popular anymore. There is a dish called Faćka. It's made from chickweed. You have to cook, fry it. This dish is very rarely eaten.
Jest bardzo rzadko spotykane. Lubię
I also like rural dishes such as potato dumplings with cheese,
ziemniaczane z serem, proste,
such simple Polish peasant dishes that are rare these days.
które już coraz rzadziej się spotyka. Znaczy,
I mean, sorrel soup can be probably found in every restaurant, but this chickweed soup, Faćka, almost nowhere.
to nigdzie już.
We have once organized an activity with MSN in Kurówek, where people from the city came and the women from the village made this Faćka. That was the last time I ate it. Also tea. I like nettle tea, for example. In general, food made out of local products.
Materiałów tutaj pozyskamy.
And can you cook?
Trochę, tak. Znaczy nie, tak, potrafię.
Yes, I can. Now in summer, I grow a lot of things in my garden, and it all tastes completely different. These tomatoes, cucumbers, lettuce, it all tastes completely different from those bought in a store.
Kilka ogródków.
Also, potatoes taste differently, because all the local shops in Sierpc take them directly from the farmers, from the fields.
One są zupełnie inne.
In general, I like potato things. I remember this one quote from a peasant diary.
Pamiętam cytat. Ja czytam.
I read a lot of peasant memoirs, texts written by farmers themselves in the 30s. I remember there was a fragment written by one peasant saying, "We must be more than just the potatoes." Because at that time, peasants ate mainly potatoes, or actually only potatoes, garnished with a little something to it. Potato is a Polish national vegetable, which, in my opinion, gets too little attention. And when you read those peasant diaries from the 30s, actually until the 90s, everything revolved around the potato. And I even had some ideas for potato art projects, and I will probably return to these ideas someday.
Pewnie chyba do tego wrócę kiedyś.
Very interesting. Recently, I've organized in Berlin a dinner about the potato, with a cultural program about the potato and all the dishes made out of potatoes. So it's a great topic.
Ale fajnie.
Thanks a lot for your time, for the conversation, for being willing to speak about your projects, also the older ones. We warmly invite everyone to your exhibition in Szczecin and to follow your future projects. And of course, your work, Strachy, is on view in the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw. I think it's part of the permanent collection.
Well, the current exhibition is there until October, but the work is part of the museum's collection, so it will be returning for sure.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patrycja. Thank you.
And this was it for today. Thank you for reaching till the end of this episode. The next one is coming in 4 weeks, always on Monday. Please follow the podcast and leave a rating. I'm also happy to hear your feedback, so feel free to write me via Instagram or by email. All the needed info you will find in the show notes of this episode. In the meantime, take good care and we hear each other soon.